Here's a video about 10 culture shocks that you might find in Australia. And I want to see if I find them weird or strange. Now, before we watch this video, can you please hit that like button? Make sure you subscribe. I don't normally ask before the video starts, but this time I will. Let's get on with it.
What's going on, guys? I'm Pete from Aussie English. Welcome to this episode today where I'm going to be talking about culture shock in Australia. Let's get into it.
Aussie.
Alright, so I was recently chatting to my wife, trying to come up with a list of things that she had culture shock with when she came to Australia. So if you don't know, my wife is originally from Brazil. Hey Hakel, if you're watching. And so she came to Australia, and obviously Brazil is a different country, different culture. When she got to Australia, there were a bunch of different things that she found strange.
I'm wondering if this might be more of a shock to Brazilians because their culture is so much different to, for example, English. So for his wife, for example, the shocks may be a little bit more extreme than for us in the UK.
Cultural aspects of Australian life that she found different, weird, strange. So I made a list, and now let's go through 10 of those things, okay? And let me know in the comments below if you found them weird as well. All right.
Yeah, sure.
Number one, cars are incredibly cheap secondhand in Australia. So cars in Australia are actually really expensive when they're new, at least as far as I know, comparatively speaking, especially if you get into luxury cars like European luxury cars like Mercedes, BMW and Audi. In Australia, we used to have the Ford and Holden manufacturers here building the cars in Australia. They no longer do that. When they did that though, the government put tax on any cars that were luxury cars more than $60,000. And so you'll find that a lot of these cars from overseas that are luxury cars, especially those from Europe, will be very expensive compared to other places in the world. She also found that second-hand cars were incredibly cheap. In Brazil, cars, whether new or second-hand, are apparently much more expensive, relatively speaking, than they are here. For instance, when I bought my second-hand Ford Falcon that I got recently, I recently gave it away though, but when I bought that second-hand, it was about 12 years old and it cost me $3,000. When I bought my first Holden wagon, again, it was about 18 years old and it cost me $2,500. So it wasn't very much at all.
Thinking of that now, my first car was a Rover 214. I love that car, Rosie the Rover. Anyway, when I first got that car, it was a P plate, I think, and I think it was about 7 years old, and I got it for, I think, £750, and that was about 11 or 12 years ago when I first started driving. So I think it really depends. I think it's far too, not subjective, but there's too many variants to say that a second-hand car is cheaper. Of course it's cheaper, but it depends what you're looking for. You know, my van that I drive at the moment, if I value it now, I bought it 3.5 years ago for £3,500. It's probably lost about £1,000 in value. So, you know, vans aren't that cheap. Don't know. I think it depends what you're looking for.
So there you go. In Australia, cars, if they're second-hand, can be incredibly
But maybe
cheap.
in Brazil,
Number
it's
two,
more expensive.
Cuts of meat. This is one that totally caught me by surprise. I had never thought about this, but the cuts of meat in Australia are very different from how they are in Brazil. One example was when I was looking up how to do Brazilian barbecues in Australia. I wanted to buy some meat and I wanted to try and do them authentically Brazil style, churrasco. I tried to get the cut of meat for picanha. Picanha is a style of Brazilian barbecue where they buy the rump part of the beef, like from the bull, right? And they put salt on it, there's fat on the beef, and they do it on a barbecue. I tried to go and get this, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find the picanha cut of meat at any different butchers that I went to.
If he's just talking about rump steak, Rump steak is like one of the cheapest bits that we can get. It's like the standard rump steak. Is he saying you struggle to get rump steak? Because if you go to a restaurant or even go to the supermarket, rump steak is the main one. It's like rump steak, then sirloin is the next up. But rump steak is standard.
So I had to specifically ask them to get the entire part of the cow that they normally chop up into different cuts and remove that part for me to then use. Because actually for them, they would chop it up and use it as porterhouse steaks, which were cut through that slice of meat usually, like this, as opposed to taking out the whole section, the rump section, and using that instead. So I had no idea that the cuts of meat in Australia are very different from those in Brazil. And if you want to get the certain cuts of meat that you want to use from other cultures, other countries, you might have to go and specifically ask a butcher to cut them for you.
That's actually quite interesting because, like I said, rump steak over here is the basic standard. And actually, it's not very good. It's not very good. Quite often it's chewy, it's tough. Even if you cook it well, as in not well done, but you cook it well, rump is not great. And actually, there's quite a few Brazilian restaurants over here where they come round with meat on the skewer, and they slice it off. It's never that good, but that's probably because it's rump steak then.
Number 3, toilet paper.
Right, I'm going to say this before it even starts, okay? Yes, most people use toilet paper, obviously. Get yourself a bidet. Bidets are the best. If you want to save on paper and you want your bum feeling as clean as... What's really clean? Okay, you fill that one in. As clean as whatever you think. A bidet is amazing. Just get a portable one for your toilet. Does the job. Amazing.
Toilet paper. So I was aware that toilet paper isn't a universal thing when I went to Southeast Asia for the first time. I went to Indonesia, where some of the motels and hotels would have toilet paper because I guess they were used to foreigners from the West coming to Indonesia. But a lot of the time they had a hole in the ground and a bucket of water that you would use to wash yourself. Makes sense, but in Australia we use toilet paper. One thing that was shocking to Kel was the fact that in Australia you can flush toilet paper down the toilet, because in Brazil the sewer system isn't set up to be able to handle flushing of toilet paper, so instead of flushing it you have to put it in a bin next to the toilet and empty that every day.
Oh, just imagine the thought of a pooey bin. That sounds gross. That's disgusting. Oh man, get a bidet.
So there you go. Toilet paper was one of those strange things in Australia that you can flush down the toilet. Number 4, coffee culture in Australia. Any of you guys who have come to Australia and spent a significant amount of time in some of the big cities in particular like Sydney and Melbourne will know that we are mental. We are crazy about our coffee.
Alright, so currently the plan is in September 2022 to fly to Melbourne. I think that's what we're almost set on, and do the ocean road. Okay, I will try the coffee because you guys say how good it is. Oh, you haven't tasted coffee until you've tried it from Melbourne. All right, I will try it, but coffee is disgusting, and all coffee tastes the same. All right, but I promise I will try it. Okay, there, I've said it. But don't be upset if I think it's disgusting. But I will try it.
Take that stuff seriously. There are probably hundreds of cafes in the CBDs of Sydney and Melbourne alone. The quality of the beans that are used, the variety of different coffees that you can get, and the artisanry that is used, the skill with which people are trained up to make the coffee is pretty much as good as it ever gets anywhere in the world.
Surely it doesn't require that much skill to make a coffee. This is, I will say, I'm not a coffee connoisseur, like I said. How much skill? People in the comments will be like, oh, I've trained for 5 years to make this mocha chocolate espresso, whatever, coffee. Sorry if I've offended you.
At least I'm told, right? I used to work in a cafe and that was one of the things they prided themselves most on, the quality of their
I will try it, I promise.
So it may be a shock when you come to Australia that the coffee is very, very good. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places. Probably not very good if you go to Starbucks, because that's American style, and Americans, they have their own way of doing coffee. Number 5, barbecues at camping grounds and at the beach. So again, I grew up in Australia. I used to go camping all the time, several times a year with my parents. We would go to places in the bush, you know, forests, national parks, places like Wilson's Promontory in Victoria. Every time you go to those places, there tend to be places where you can barbecue food, you can cook food. Quite often they have gas, you might have to put some money in there to be able to use the gas. Maybe you have to bring your own fuel for the barbecue, you know, there might be some places, campsites where you have to make the fire yourself.
Let's live up to the Australian stereotype, shall we? That is cool. That is really cool, though. I think that the only time you'll get a barbecue on the beach is if you get one of those little tinfoil disposable barbecues that people might take. Not something I've ever done, because you get sand in your food. But I like that idea that there are places set up for barbecues on the beach. That is really, really cool. A really nice idea, actually.
But pretty much every campsite you go to will have some kind of barbecue for you to cook food. And it's the same for a lot of beaches that have tourist spots where people come in large numbers and they want to have food.
Who cleans it?
So there's barbecues
Who cleans
everywhere.
the barbecue afterwards?
This was something that Kel found really strange, and it wasn't the cultural norm in Brazil for you to go to camping grounds or to beaches and find places to just barbecue your own food.
Definitely
If you wanted to do that, you'd have to bring your own. BYO Barbie. In Australia, you don't have to. Number 6, and this is one that Brazilians always tell me whenever I meet them. Our second-hand culture in Australia is different from Brazil, probably elsewhere in the world as well. So what happens if I have a couch in my house that I don't want anymore? I don't just throw it out. I don't just give it away to friends, although, you know, you could do that if you wanted. Quite often what will be done is it'll be taken outside, put on the nature strip with some cardboard that says free. And so people know that if they see junk or chairs, TVs, furniture, all that sort of stuff, if they see that in the nature strip out the front of someone's house, they know that it's free. Someone can take that, that it's free to a good home.
What's the nature strip? They don't just mean your front garden, do they? I assume. People occasionally do that over here, but obviously the risk is it rains and then everything gets wet and ruined. But it does happen over here sometimes. But actually, I think our now use of selling used stuff is through Facebook Marketplace. The amount of stuff you can get from Facebook Marketplace these days is insane. But yeah, what's the thingy strip?
Anyone can come and pick that up and take it home, and we do that all the time.
I assume this is for free.
A lot of the stuff that we have in our house is either bought secondhand online through places like Gumtree or Facebook, or we've seen it on the side of the road and thought, we don't want to waste that, we want to use it, so let's just bring it home and use it. So that's something you'll notice in Australia quite a lot. When you drive around the streets, there'll be furniture on nature strips, there'll be secondhand stuff, and it's free to be picked up. Number 7, drinking water from the tap. This was another one that shocked me quite a lot, because it's something I take for granted, that the water in our water system that gets brought to our houses is drinkable.
This isn't a shock at all, and I think actually this is something that the Aussies and English and UK would have in common then, because, for example, when you go abroad, if you go to somewhere like Spain or something, you are told don't drink the tap water because it will make you ill. So you end up having to get bottled water, which seems crazy. Over here, we got tap water. It annoys me when people buy bottles of water from a shop. You think you could literally, the tap is free and it tastes fine. All right, granted, water's not that great in general, but I refuse to let Charlie buy a bottle of water. If you're, at Tesco's and you're getting a meal deal, I always say, get something fizzy or with flavour, and otherwise it's a waste of your money because water is free, more or less. We do still have the thing, obviously, upstairs, because normally most houses are separate plumbing for the upstairs bathroom, so you don't drink the upstairs bathroom water normally.
You can drink the water out of the shower, when you're having a bath, you can drink any of the water that comes out of the pipes in your house. Generally, right? Should be all good.
That's what I say,
that is not the case
upstairs
elsewhere in the
normally
world.
isn't.
Quite often when I was traveling in Southeast Asia, that would definitely not be something that foreigners like me should do, because we would quite often end up with
Dodgy
sickness,
tummy.
end up on the toilet, riding the porcelain throne for quite a few days with a digestive illness. In Australia, it tends to be fine. We put chlorine in the water to kill everything. There's fluoride in there too for your teeth.
It's so well treated.
So that was something that really shocked me.
The only difference you get with water over here is depending on where you're located. For example, where I'm from, the water is quite chalky. But actually, I don't mind that. I think it adds a little bit of flavour. But some people don't like it like that. But yeah, our water's very well treated and it's readily available for more or less free.
Elsewhere in the world, you may not be able to drink out of the taps. I know that in Brazil, they quite often have purifiers for their water right next to their sinks in their kitchens. In Australia, you won't see those things. There may be purifiers on the taps themselves, or people may have some kind of equipment in the fridge, you know, a jug that purifies the water. But generally, anywhere in Australia that has flowing water that comes out of taps, it's fine to drink, unless it says otherwise. Number 8, and I'm totally guilty of this, leaving things unlocked. So we live in Ocean Grove, which is a seaside town down the coast, about an hour and a half away from Melbourne. And quite often, I leave the doors unlocked in the house. I leave my car unlocked. It tends to be a very safe place. There's very little robbery, there's very little criminality taking place in Ocean Grove. Most places in Australia tend to be pretty safe, and you won't see things like massive locks on doors, grills protecting windows and doors, and people leaving their cars and their houses unlocked.
I would not leave my house unlocked unless I'm literally popping over the road to the shop, which is literally 50 metres. I would not leave the door unlocked. I would not leave my van unlocked, Charlie's car unlocked, nothing. You've got bolts on the back gate. We have... Everyone seems to be getting doorbell cameras now. Don't get Ring because you're paying for a subscription. But yeah, you always hear stories from grandparents of how, oh, you can't leave your house unlocked these days with all the crime, and they used to back in the day. But yeah, you wouldn't leave things unlocked these days.
Don't get me wrong. I definitely lock it from time to time when I'm going away or I'm going out for a long period of time and no one's at home. But this was something that my wife Kel from Brazil found very strange, that you would just leave doors open.
It is strange.
Or
That's strange,
you know,
for
you
us.
would go to bed and have the gauze doors shut at night, which could just be opened to let air in. She would find that very strange that they would not be locked. And also that you wouldn't lock your car. Number 9, walking the streets at night. So when I met my wife, I was living in Melbourne, in North Melbourne, and quite often I would be busy during the day studying, and then I would go to the gym, I would go and do jiu-jitsu, I would come home, and at maybe 10 or 11 o'clock at night, I would go for a run, or I'd go for a walk, listen to a podcast, and just walk around the streets. I would walk through some of the parks, like Royal Park or Princes Park, and I'd be like, you know, it's not a problem. That was a massive no-no for Kel. That was something that she would never, ever, ever do.
I think for walking around at night, I think Brazil is a situation of... I think Brazil, with all due respect, I think crime is possibly more highlighted over there, especially at night time. Over here in the UK, I think it is very subjective. I think I'm using the word wrong, sorry. It's very much where you live. I think if you're in like middle of London, it's normal for people to walk around at night time and doing whatever. I think if you then move away from London, so for example where I'm from, I don't think you would just randomly walk because everything's closed. Why would you just walk around at night when everything's closed? Doesn't make sense. So I think it's very much location based. Because
in Brazil, it's relatively unsafe to walk around by yourself at night, especially in places like parks where there's no light. So that was something that kind of shocked me as well. I was like, well, you know, it's Australia. Well, it's pretty safe here. You can sort of walk around anywhere and it's, you know, you're fine. Obviously, we have our own fair share of crime and sometimes bad things do happen to people, but usually You can walk around at night, especially in somewhere like a CBD, a city like Melbourne or Sydney, and you're perfectly safe.
it's all lit
So that was
up
something that she found
well,
very
so-
strange. That was a big culture shock for her when she found out that I would sometimes go for a walk around midnight throughout Melbourne, throughout the parks, with music in my ears or listening to a podcast, for an hour or so, and it was no big deal.
My thought, though, is, for starters, I'd be in bed. I'd be knackered, knowing I've got to get up for work. Does he just not work in the morning? Oh, man, that's the problem. I'd be absolutely shattered the next morning.
But yeah, there you go. Number 10, guys, the very last one for this episode in Australia is that there is very little rubbish or littering in Australia compared to a lot of other countries. Culturally, this is a big no-no. So I cringe every time I see someone smoking who throws their cigarette butt on the ground, because usually there's a bin within walking.
Oh, I'm ready for a rant. Are you ready for this? Oh my God, dirty, filthy smokers. And I have said that. If you don't like it, tough. Filthy smokers. I have only met one person in my lifetime that will not chuck fags on the floor, right? And that was when we went to Poland. A lady from England. She had a little purse that she would put her fag butts in. That is the only person. The amount of times I'm walking or I'm driving and I see someone chuck their fag on the floor, chuck it out their car window, right? I bought a dash cam just to catch people that chuck their fags out so I can send to the council, because that's how much it enrages me. These people that chuck fags, I'll give you an example, right? I was in my town, in the high street. Someone was literally a metre away from the bin and they chucked their fag on the floor. I said to them, there's a bin right there. There is a bin right there. If all you smokers didn't keep doing that, we might actually be able to spend our council tax money on more important things. Oh, well, I pay my council tax, he says. I think that's not the point. That's not the point. You're an arse. Just put it in the bin or don't smoke at all. I think we need to... let's tax them even more. Tax these filthy smokers. I hate smokers. I really, really hate smokers. Sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry, because if you smoke, you deserve it.
Distance that they could just put the cigarette out and throw it in the bin.
my heart
The same
rate's
with
gone.
throwing newspapers
Just don't get it.
or
Why throw
any
on the
kind of
floor for
rubbish,
someone else to
bottles,
pick up?
whatever it is, on the ground. That tends to be a very big social no-no. You don't do that. You put it in the trash. We have bins all over the country, in parks, on streets, where you can throw your rubbish out. So in Australia, littering, it occurs, people definitely litter, but it is a social no-no.
This is the other problem, right? Littering over here and chucking your fag on the floor, it is a finable offence. I think you can be fined up to £1,000. Problem is, people don't get fined £1,000 for littering. Punish these people. I've said this plenty of times. I would happily, right, walk around a town fining people. I could easily make my wages up just from fining people. I could do that as a career. I could.
You will quite often be yelled at, or people will say something if you do that in front of people.
Good.
Okay? So that's it for this episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to let me know down in the comments below if you have another piece of cultural shock, another thing that shocked you about Australian culture when you came here, because I'm sure that I haven't included everything that is...
Thank you, Aussie English. What was the biggest shocks to you? You've obviously heard what I found was shocking. What was the biggest shock? What do you think is the weirdest thing? For example, if you're watching this and you're from the UK like me, which one of them do you think is the weirdest or most shocking? If you're not from the UK, but from, I don't know, Germany or somewhere else, what do you think is the most shocking? If you're in Australia, which a lot of my audience is, do you actually think any of these are shocking, or is it just normal? Let me know. I think one of the most shocking things for me, it's either the meat cut, so for example, rump steak is just a basic standard one that it's everywhere. But actually, I think the most shocking thing that we wouldn't have is having barbecues just set up on the beach ready for people to use. I think that is brilliant. Don't think it would work very well over here though, because obviously weather's rubbish. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time.